Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on for the first time, Ryan Burke. If you aren't familiar with him, he just graduated with his master's at Lehman College. He was in the Applied Muscle Development Lab with Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. Tried to get him on the podcast a couple times. I know he's super busy, haven't been able to yet. But Ryan, man, really appreciate you coming on today. Really looking forward to chatting with you. I know you had a recent study. We'll dive into all that. But yeah, man, thanks for coming on and looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, Jeff. I'm really excited.
Real quick, like we talked about off air, I always like to, if you're a new guest, just talk about your background, how you got to where you're at today. So if you don't mind filling the audience in on that, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So pretty much I played a lot of sports growing up. That was a big part of my life all throughout high school and everything. And so I was always looking to improve my performance because I'm not the biggest, fastest, or strongest guy out there on the field or on the mat. So I got into lifting and just, I guess you could say I was fascinated by strength conditioning earlier on in my life. So that was always was like a passion for me, like a side hobby. So when it came time to go to undergrad and pursue a degree, I decided to focus on exercise science. And it was pretty early on that I realized like I wanted to get into research and potentially even continue to train athletes or just general population. So that's, I guess, my origin and how I got interested in this field. But yeah, I ended up going to Ohio State, got involved in some research there as an undergrad. Their exercise science lab, the research I was involved in was more so about like just health, general health, and dealing with obesity and issues like that, which I really enjoyed immensely. But I wanted something more involved with either sport performance or looked a little closely at like strength or hypertrophy or just muscular adaptations in general. I'm originally from New Jersey, from the East Coast, so I wanted to go back home for my grad school journey. So I found Lehman College mostly through reading some studies and knowing who Brad Schoenfeld is. So I ended up going there, and 2 years later, here we are, just finished up there. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah. So it sounds like you were at Ohio State, and like you said, it was more of just kind of generalized, but you obviously wanted to dive a little bit more into the muscle side of things, and you went to the right place, right? Dr. Brad Schoenfeld's like I think we call him like the hypertrophy, the godfather, basically on there with that. So definitely learn from the right person there. What did the classes look like there? Was it again geared a lot towards like hypertrophy and strength and nutrition around it, or what did the classes look like there for that?
Yeah, I would say all the above. You just hit on it. I can think. I also had Dr. Mike Israetel was an adjunct professor there as well. So one of his classes was advanced training methodologies and strength and hypertrophy. We had a sports nutrition class, also exercise epidemiology, even. So looking at all different facets in that field, but it was definitely, I would say, more geared toward strength and hypertrophy or just muscular adaptations in general to resistance training, but also endurance training as well. But it was cool getting to take classes with people like them and then also complement that with being in the trenches, carrying out the research and understanding like how we can apply or use both concepts from what I'm learning and then also what I'm learning in research and intertwine them a lot. So I learned a ton in my time there at Lehman, and I'm definitely grateful for all the relationships I made as well as the lessons that Dr. Schoenfeld taught me. So yeah, it was, I would say, in short, definitely a focus on hypertrophy and strength, but a well-rounded program.
Were you, again, I'm not like too familiar with exactly from a master's perspective how much but were you involved with like other research there as well too? Obviously, we're going to talk about the Superset study that you had, but were
Mhm.
you part of like other research? I guess how in depth did that kind of?
Yeah, so it's a fairly small program. I would say it's growing. It's grown a lot since it started. I think it originated in like 2019 or something like that, and now it's already growing a lot. They're expecting a PhD program next year, which is awesome. But usually they have one long-term study, 1 to 2 long-term studies a semester, and then there's could be several acute studies that are going on simultaneously. Usually, I'm always in my time there, I was always helping out with the long-term studies. And like this past semester was the Superset study. That was like the longitudinal study. So I was always focused on that. And then also when I can or when we all could, we helped out with some of the acute stuff going on. But I would say usually like one per semester and then maybe one other that there could be going on at the simultaneously.
Was there anything like over the last 2 years for you that really caught your eye from the hypertrophy research side of things? Was there anything big that they worked on there that really caught your eye?
In terms of what I was a part of was you had Max Coleman on your show, right?
Yep.
Before. Yeah. So he was a year above me, and shout out Max Coleman. He love that guy. I just saw him last week, but he carried out. So when I first got there, he carried out a study on comparing supervision versus non-supervision during resistance
Mm.
training. So that was my introduction to research at Lehman. And then I got to be a part of his deload study as well, which I'm sure you've heard of. So those were the two that went on during my first year. And then last fall, it's just got accepted for publication, but we did a study comparing like the leg press to a leg extension and then the seated calf to a straight leg calf to look at differences in like regional muscle growth of the quads and the calf muscles. And then again, just the superset study just now. And then also my friend Alec Pinheiro, he's carrying out a pretty cool study looking at the effects of post activation performance enhancement. So like doing like a heavy squat followed up by like a jump and looking at changes in jump performance. It's pretty cool, like the variety of research going on. Like you got like I said, Alec, we're looking at muscle growth, but then Alec's looking at like sports performance and jumping performance in athletes. I would say just like the overall, just seeing the topics that get thrown around each semester. It's almost like Christmas every time when you're waiting. What's the next thing we're gonna study? But they were all pretty cool. Learn a little something from each one. But yeah, those are the ones I mentioned that Max carried out. I think those are all out now. And he's talked about them on your podcast as well.
Yeah, Matt, I think when I had Max on, we specifically talked about the deload one. I thought that was a super cool study and pretty applicable, I feel, to people that listen. Yeah, man, I know research is tough. Again, every time I bring somebody on, people are probably sick of me saying this, but anytime I bring somebody on that's active in the research, man, it's always it's a long, grueling, tough process. So I always appreciate the work you guys do to move the field forward and everything like that. I guess for you, man, what's next? You just recently graduated with your master's. Again, I don't know if I mentioned it on here, but congrats on that. We talked about that off air, but congrats on that. That's awesome. What's next for you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in September, I'm starting at Rutgers University and I'm going to be pursuing a PhD there. So I'll be teaching, getting a PhD, and also I'll be working in their applied biomechanics lab. So that's what's next for me. So I'll get to, like I told you off there, originally from New Jersey. So I live a little closer to home now because Lehman's obviously in the Bronx in New York. Yeah, that's the next step for me.
So with that, so you said it's their applied, did you say applied biomechanics? Is that the lab you said?
Yep.
What do you like? Do you have an idea of kind of which direction you're going to go, what that's going to look like, or you still just leaving that open for just see what interests you and stuff like that?
Yeah, in terms of like dissertation topic, I definitely don't have that pinpointed yet. So still thinking about ideas and all that. I'm very interested in a lot of different topics, but potentially throwing around something related to sports performance, or I'm always interested now being a part of the applied muscle development lab. Obviously muscular adaptations are of interest to me as well. So I've always been a fan of looking into or studying like concurrent training or just on my own, like looking into that literature. So the simultaneous use of resistance training and then aerobic endurance training in programming and its effects on sports related outcomes or even muscular adaptation. So I'm interested in potentially diving into something related to that. We'll see, but yeah.
It seems, and again, it seems like you're pretty up to date on this. It seems like the concurrent training kind of research seems like it's taken off a little bit recently. It seems like there's been a lot more around. I think there was just that meta just released recently talking about, I think it was like men versus women. But it seems like, am I right there? That seems like the research is picking up there. Has it always been that way? Maybe I'm just more open to it now at this point or more aware of it now.
But no, I think I've also noticed, at least it's been talked about a lot lately, more so than usual. And it fascinates me just because it's such a difficult area to study because there's so
Yep.
many different combinations of doing exercise or cardio prior to post, later in the day, earlier in the day, on off days. There's so many different combinations that makes it so difficult to study, especially in trained individuals, and accounting for somebody who has, if I'm recruiting somebody for a study, accounting for somebody that has resistance training experience, but also cardio, like experience in a certain modality for cardio. So there's a lot of variables at play that makes it difficult to study. I will say, going back, you were asking me about the classes I took at Lehman. One of the classes, one of my favorite classes with Dr. Schoenfeld was like, we had a topic, we'll say 5 topics throughout the semester, where it was like almost like a controversial topic. And we had to dive into the research and then basically come up with a consensus or talk about it. So one of the topics was like, what are the implications for concurrent training and its effects on like muscle growth or strength? Does it the interference effect? So when I dove into that literature and looked into it, that's when I really started, this is really interesting stuff, especially just because my background, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, but I do like right now I'm primarily focused on lifting with the goal of gaining muscle growth, with the goal of hypertrophy. But I do like endurance sport as well. I trained for marathons in my past and dabble in like Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff. So I do enjoy blending those two together. So that is a topic that does fascinate me and that I would be interested in further pursuing.
Yeah. Is there anything specific that you would like to maybe research, or is that part of the process figuring out? I know I'm putting you on the spot here with that, but I didn't know if you had anything in mind
Ah,
potentially that you're like, I'd really like to see a little bit more research around this and how it impacts whatever that may be.
no, nothing specific, I would say. So definitely something I would have to, now that I'm done the semester and everything and have a little more time, I think now the summer is a good time to really maybe get a better grasp on that to figure out what exactly I want to look into.
Cool. Do you do any coaching? Do you plan on doing any coaching? Is that kind of like part of your future as well in this field or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. So currently I'm right now, that's what I'm doing now. I'm back home in New Jersey. I work at a private gym where I do training there, personal training there. And then I also work as an online coach for the Parnell plan. It's one of my colleagues and peers at Lehman. His name's Chris Parnell. Shout out Chris, but he's got a training service and online coaching that I help out with consultations and whatnot, since I obviously can't be in New York, but I help out with the online side of things. So yeah, that's what kind of got me into this in the first place, was that wanting to obviously explore research and carry out research, but also be able to apply that to the floor and continue to coach and train people and blend those two together.
Yeah, I think that is super important. Obviously, anybody that does research, like I said, man, it's all super important. But I think really having that practical, hands-on experience really can go a long way there. I think that's super important. Do you typically train? Do you have any like kind of clientele that you typically train? Is it more like athletes, or is it a combination, or what does that look like?
Yeah, right now it's general population. I have a couple years ago, I worked at a strength and conditioning gym where that was primarily athletes ranging from, we're talking grade school kids to collegiate athletes, which I really enjoyed as well. But right now is mostly just gen pop, looking to improve general health or get, and there's some people that are like, I want to grow muscle specifically. So I would say a range of individuals from like recreational lifters to just general soccer moms and dads that are looking to just get in shape. So it's a cool blend. But I would say, going back, once I started Rutgers and whatnot, would like to dabble more in working with athletes as well. That was my first love and what got me into this field. But I definitely enjoy working with all different types of individuals.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, that's super cool. Cool. Yeah, let's talk about your training and nutrition. What does that kind of look like? You said you talked about how your main thing is trying to build muscle right now, but you also have done like marathons, trained for marathons in the past as well too. So yeah, what does that look like for you now? And yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'd say the last 5 months have been strictly or mostly just lifting. I lift 5, 6 times a week. My split's weird. Right now I'm figuring out a routine again now that I'm back home. So it's I'm predominantly focusing on trying to grow my legs because I think they're a weak point for me. But so it's anywhere from three, I would say, full body days where it's predominantly focused on like the quads, but also sprinkling in some upper body work as needed, accessory work. And then I have filled the rest of the days in usually with some upper body focused workouts, or exercises. But for the most part, I'm just taking it week to week, seeing how I recover and whatnot. But that's been my focus as of late. And the last couple of months, I've been trying to, I guess you could call it a bulk, just slightly gain some mass. So I usually eat pretty intuitively, but I have been tracking the last couple of months. I'm pretty simple with it. Like, I just really focus on my calories to make sure I'm not overeating and bulking up too fast, but just my calories, making sure I hit my protein intake. And then I don't really care too much about the other macros. So I just let the carbs and fats fall where they may and really just focus on getting plenty of fiber and then a couple servings of fruits and veggies, and then I just let the rest fall into place. But that's what I've been doing the last couple months. And I would say the last couple weeks though, since I've been home, have mostly been eating intuitively and still again focus on making sure I'm hitting the protein and all that. But like I said, I just got started back with my job as a trainer here, transitioning from the full on researcher grad school life to this. So still trying to find that routine back, but that's been life as of late. But yeah, I still enjoy. I will say, like, I sneak in some type of cardio several times a week, whether it's like some type of hit training on like an air assault bike, or maybe I'll go for a 3 mile run or something like that. Because the last 2 summers I spent more so prioritizing my endurance because I did a couple marathons with some of my friends. So that was somewhat the priority. I always consistently lift though, it just gaining muscle wasn't the number one focus in that regard. So now I have some time where I can put more emphasis on that. But that's where I'm at right now.
Man, yeah. So just the last couple of years been more focused on just maintaining muscle and more so just focusing on your endurance. How did the marathons go? Was it, yeah, did you do pretty well, or was the training a lot more intense than you thought? Or yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely, I would say it's definitely intense, especially toward the closer it got to the race, the couple months leading out. The race was like in November. So it was right when it started to my miles started to really creep up was right when the semester started and we started to study. So balancing all that was a little difficult. That's why I'm happy that this upcoming fall I'm not doing a marathon or anything, but it went really well. I was really happy with my time. So yeah, I had no issues with it. I would say it probably went as perfectly as I wanted. And I was hoping I finished in 3 hours and 31 minutes, I think, which was my goal. And I was happy for that, for how much that I put into it. But yeah, I don't really have any desire to do another one anytime soon. Just say that.
Yeah, I don't blame you, man. Man, the amount you would have to do, that would be a lot for me. Cardio has been something that I neglected for a while. I was on the thought that any amount of cardio is going to ruin the gains, but obviously as a lot of this concurrent training research has come out, it's okay. If you're smart about it, you're going to be good to go for the most part. And obviously the health benefits of adding in some cardio, man, just are super important. So I think it's good to get that in. So it sounds like for you, just hitting that once or twice a week, essentially. Do you like, you said you do some hit, maybe 3 mile runs. Do you focus on like intensity on that, or is it just again off feel and how just basically what you're feeling that day essentially?
Yeah, I would say more so how I'm feeling, right? Because like I said, my goal is to grow my legs. So it's like I don't run very often just because some of the literature does suggest that maybe running can be just because the eccentric demands on running is a little bit more high impact, could interfere more with lower body growth compared to something like cycling. So I usually try to opt for more low impact cardio just for those health benefits and making sure that I'm keeping my endurance up at least somewhat. But yeah, it's really just off of feel. Like I was originally planning to do some this morning because we have like an aerosol bike at work, the gym I work at, but had a couple extra clients hop on late last minute, so I didn't have time. So I'm not like sweating it. Like I didn't get it in today, so I'll push it off to another time. I really just shoot for trying like once or twice a week, and I just do like intervals. So I'll do something like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, high intensity, and then recovery. Do that for, I don't know, like anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes, whatever it is, and then call it a day there. But it definitely wipes me. I will say the air assault bike is probably my favorite piece of cardio equipment, but also it's like a love-hate relationship because I've never gotten my heart rate up faster in such a short period of time from that thing. So yeah, that's how I go about it because at the end of the day, I'm prioritizing lifting and trying to gain some muscles. I would say cardio is more of a back thought. I do get it in. And also I get the main thing I do focus on, I would say, is just getting a lot of steps in, which is easy. I know you train as well, training clients as well as that. Like that's an easy thing when I work every morning and I'm getting like 10,000 steps by the end of my shifts all the time, or by the time I have the last client. So as long as that's where it needs to be, that's really what I'm focused on. And then the other type of structured cardio that I implement or endurance exercise that I implement is just more so for fun or just when I can.
Yeah. No, that was actually something I was going to bring up to you is, man, when you're in person like that, you don't really have to focus on getting too many steps, at least like going out of your way. It just naturally happens. I actually just work online now. So like when I made that transition, man,
Nice.
it definitely was like a kind of lifestyle adjustment, right? And I think a lot of people don't really realize that they go from a job that they're pretty active to where they're not. Like that really does impact things. And you just have to go out of your way a little bit more to get some movement in. But yeah, no, when I was training in person, man, it was like, just easy to get. I definitely had to eat a lot more, I feel like, to just maintain weight and make sure that I was eating enough there. And cutting was, I feel like, a little bit easier when you have that movement just built into your day like that. Cool, man. Yeah, no, I love just diving into training and just seeing what you do there with that. So perfect. Let's go into the topic. So we talked about this a little bit. I'm sure some people probably saw it on social media. You just carried out a superset study and you're actually like the lead author on it. Yeah, man, fill me in real quick. I'll go over the title of it. It was Less Time, Same Gains, Comparison of Superset versus Traditional Set Training on Muscular Adaptations. Just in case, I guess the audience may not know, most people probably know, maybe go over like what the definition is of a superset, and then we can talk about maybe the kind of research surrounding supersets before you carried out your study, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So generally speaking, a superset would be performing two different exercises with usually minimal rest between them, but there's no like actual universal definition. Oh, you have to rest this certain amount of period of time between the two exercises, but it'd be something like doing a set of lat pull down and then going right over to the bench press and doing a set of bench press and then resting for a certain period of time and then repeating that process. Whereas like Traditional sets, as we called it in the paper, or a lot of times referred to as straight sets, would just be like doing a set of lat pull down, resting a couple minutes, and then doing another set of lat pull down and repeat that until you've done the total amount of sets that you want to do that day, then moving on to bench press or whatever that next exercise would be. So I'd say that's probably the simplest way to explain it.
Yeah, no, super helpful there. Because again, these are like topics that, like, again, we as coaches, trainers, like, we've been around it for a while. We think everyone knows, but sometimes people are like, what are supersets? So I think it's super important to dive into that. Cool. I guess before you dive into the specifics of your study, what was the research surrounding supersets like before you did this, and your reason for wanting to dive into this a little bit more?
Yeah. So this was my thesis topic actually. Originally, Dr. Schoenfeld always says if you want to carry out a thesis, start thinking about a potential topic idea. So my first semester at Lehman, I was looking into potential topic ideas, and I thought about supersets because me personally, I like always train with supersets whenever I can, right? Unless I'm like in a busy commercial gym and it's difficult, but when possible, I take advantage of supersets. I just not only because it's quicker, but also I just enjoy it. I think it's fun. So I always was curious. I was like, am I compromising my gains by doing supersets compared to straight sets? Because at the time too, there was that a big thing on, and still is to some extent, but shout out to some other people at Lehman who just carried out a meta-analysis on like rest interval data. But I was thinking like at the time it was thought that longer rest periods are probably benefit muscle growth the most. And I was like, I don't want to, I don't enjoy that as much as supersetting different exercises, but I was still curious, like, am I leaving anything on the table by doing so? So I dove into the research expecting supersets to be extremely well covered in terms of the long-term studies looking at hypertrophy and strength, just because it's such in my opinion, a commonly used strategy, or it's a well-known strategy. And to my surprise, when I looked into the data, there was like at the time I only found one study that looked at muscle growth, and it was like we talked about earlier, anyone carrying out long-term study, big kudos to them because it's definitely a massive undertaking. But the study itself, it was hard to draw conclusions from because it was untrained subjects, small sample size, and they just looked at biceps curl and triceps extension using resistance bands. So that would be like me saying, Jeff, go for 8 weeks. I'm going to have you come in, and all you're going to do is just biceps curls and triceps extensions with resistance bands. Generally speaking, that's not a commonly used approach, I would say, in the real world, right? So there were some limitations to the exercises, especially given there was only two exercises. Curious, like what would like a multi superset protocol look like on hypertrophy, given maybe potential effects of like residual fatigue and all that stuff. So that's where I started thinking like, all right, this is something I would like to look into. And then a year and a half later, we ended up coming up with the methods and all that and carrying it out. Yeah, that's the origin, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So really it like you said, it's a popular kind of strategy that people use. So like you said, you'd think that there would be a lot of research around it, but you found as you dove into it, there really wasn't much out there on it, which is, like you said, super interesting because, again, people use it all the time. So cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I guess you also mentioned you brought out, or you had some metas that come out. Was that kind of something that you had to do like beforehand before you carried out your research, or maybe I just misunderstood that?
Oh no, sorry. That was like a separate meta-analysis looking at like different rest intervals and its effects on muscle
Got
growth
you.
with just straight sets. But I will say too, I like had to carry out like a literature review prior. So it's like dive into the research, get an idea of all the research on the topic. So that way it strengthens my understanding of the topic, as well as my ability to make them as needed. But I will say, I forgot to mention too, there's a ton of research on super, but they're acute studies. So like just like, think like short term. So I'm talking like it would be like just looking at performance or like volume load or the amount of repetitions you can perform. So they'd have, we'll say like 10 subjects come in and they'll do a 2 time thing where they'll have them perform bench press and lat pull down as straight sets. And then they'll come in the next day and perform that as a superset and then compare the amount of reps they performed, compare the time it took to do that, as well as the RPE, which is rating of perceived exertion. So an assessment of how challenging they perceive the exercise to be and compare that. So there's like a ton of studies on that. But obviously those are short-term studies, right? So there was 2 studies on hypertrophy, again, limitations I just mentioned. And there was one other study that I'm aware of looking at strength. And this is specific, by the way, I should have pointed out, to agonist antagonist supersets. So that would be like there's different exercises that you can superset, obviously, but the most common one, and the one that's studied the most, I would say, is the agonist antagonist superset, which is like doing a biceps curl and then a triceps push down, because those are antagonistic muscles, or doing an exercise that targets the chest, then the back, or the quads, then the hamstring. That's the most commonly studied superset, but there's also an agonist superset, which is like doing pre-exhaust. So doing like instead of pec flies, then a bench press. Or there's also called non-overlapping supersets, which is just doing supersets for two different muscles that aren't related. So think like an upper lower superset, maybe like a squat and a bench press.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So again, like you said, kind of there was more out there from an acute sense where they were just looking at like performance in like a session basically and seeing what happened there, but nothing that was like multiple weeks and seeing like a muscle building standpoint over extended periods of time is what it sounds like.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. All right, let's dive into. So I think that gives a good idea of the thought process going into it, the research around it. Let's talk about your study, the design of it, and maybe also hit on like your kind of hypothesis, like going into it as well too.
Sure. Yeah, we recruited 50 participants. They all, to be in the study, you had to be between the ages of 18 and 40, and then also have at least 1 year of lifting experience. So the methods of the study itself was, for 8 weeks, they did a training intervention where they performed the lat pull down, the Smith machine bench press, the leg curl, the leg extension, and then the biceps curl and triceps push down exercises for 4 sets of each, all to failure, twice weekly. And it was so like we kept the loads within, or kept it within the 8 to 12 rep range. For example, if they were to do a set, generally we try to adjust the loads so that they would hit failure between that 8 to 12 rep range, just for consistency purposes. So that was the training intervention itself. Half of those subjects were allocated to the traditional sets condition, the other half to the supersets condition. And then prior to that intervention, we looked at muscle growth or muscle mass, muscle size, I should say, using ultrasound. So we looked at the biceps, triceps, and then the quadriceps and the hamstrings. I looked at muscle thickness using the ultrasound. And then we also looked at strength assessments as well. So we looked at Smith machine 1RM. We had them on the bench press. So we looked at 1RM there. We also looked at isometric strength using a dynamometer for the quadriceps. And then we looked at tests for muscle endurance on the Smith machine again, and then the leg extension. So basically think like a max, we took like 60% of their body weight and then put that load in on the leg extension and had them perform as many reps as possible. And then similarly for like the bench press, we took 50% of their 1RM and then had them do that as many reps as possible. And we repeated that pre and post study to compare changes in local muscle endurance. And then we also looked at lower body power. So we have a jump mat where we looked at the vertical jump and we compared that pre and post. And I don't think I'm missing anything there, but so those were like the long-term outcomes that we looked at pre and post study. We also carried out, prior to the actual training intervention, we did our own little acute study. So what I just mentioned, we had all the subjects come in and they performed one session under each group. And we looked at the time it took to complete the training session.
Nice.
We had them assess RPE, and then we also compared the volume load, so the amount of reps and the weight so we kept the load the same for both conditions. It would be like me coming in on day one and using a certain load, I'd do all my sets as traditional sets, and then 2 days later or 3 days later, whatever it is, come back in and do the same thing with the same weight, but as supersets. And then I can compare my individual performance, and we looked at the averages there to compare, like I said, the time as well as the volume. So then after that, they proceeded to the 8-week training intervention. So that was the method. Those were the methods overall. I don't think I missed anything there. I know I just said a bunch, but yeah, that was the gist.
So it sounds like that was to get a little bit more data in terms of like how long it took to do it, right? Because it's, again, obviously you looked at the muscle growth, but it's okay, are we actually saving time? And then I'm assuming the other aspect, I think you said the RPE, I'm assuming that's just to see like how challenging it was and like how they felt it doing the supersets were essentially.
Exactly. Because there was a lot of like acute studies which looked at, because of the condensed training period, you're doing the same amount of working sets with supersets as you are traditional sets, but the total training time is cut down. So because the training density is increased, that has been correlated to an increased in the demands on the body, and it potentially is perceived as more challenging. So we wanted to look at that just to see. And we also, after the fact, we originally weren't planning to look at this, but some of the subjects were reporting like nausea or feeling like they had the vomit or whatnot. Not super frequent, more so in the beginning, but some of it did persist. So after the study, we had them recall or write down like how often they felt like this and if it persisted or if they ever vomited, just because, and compare that. Because supersets has been thought to be more taxing, we are interested to see if maybe there, because of the greater demands, do you have potentially more instances of nausea, and how does that change or stay the same over an 8 week period? So we also looked at that through recall at the end, just as another thing to mention.
Just to see if they like adapt to it, where it's like, hey, it's challenging at the beginning, but you can adapt to it. Do you think that has like a cardiovascular component to it as well, too, potentially?
For sure, yeah, I do. Some subjects were saying like they felt, especially like when you're doing a set, even though it's not for the same muscle group, like the local muscle is working. If I do a set of lat pull down, then bench press, I'm working two different muscles, but you're still systemically, there's little rest between those two efforts. There's definitely, I would imagine, some greater demands on the cardiovascular system.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned you guys looked at power too. Was there any particular reason you wanted to look at that? Was that just some more data that you could get? Were you looking at like fatigue there, or was there anything specific with that?
No, it was more so it doesn't take very long. It's just like a mat that hooks up.
Gotcha.
It's just another outcome that we can potentially look at. Spoiler alert, because like our protocol wasn't really tailored toward improving lower body power. We didn't really see much differences at all in between groups. But as you said, just another outcome we included just because we could, and it didn't take much time to do so.
Might as well if you can add it in, especially with all the work that it takes to get these studies going. Cool. And then I think you hit on everything. So I guess a couple more questions on the kind of design. So just looking at this, it was 2 minutes rest in between sets for the straight, and then it was 20 seconds rest in between each superset, and then 2 minutes rest in between there. You said 2 times a week training. Was that all the subjects did? Was there any way to find out? Because again, I know that's obviously one downside of research is that people can technically do more. I'm assuming you are just going off of like just honesty there with that.
Yeah, no. So I can't believe I forgot to say that. But yeah, first hitting on that, there was with the traditional sets, you would do a set for an exercise, rest 2 minutes, and then repeat that. And then the supersets group, it was perform a set for the exercise and then go as quickly as possible to the next exercise. And we clocked that as like the transition time was generally around 20 seconds. That was the period there, but it was usually like minimal rest between those two exercises. And then once you did that, you rest for 2 minutes. Lat pull down to bench press, rest for 2 minutes, and then repeat that. And same with the other paired exercises. We paired the leg curl and the leg extension, and then the biceps curl and the triceps push down. But yeah, as for they were only allowed to do that in terms of resistance training. So they weren't allowed to do any other training outside the study itself. And that's something like when I meet with them to try to recruit them to the study, I explain that to them very clearly and say, listen, I get it. You don't want to partake in the study because of the restrictions, no problem. It's no big deal. So usually they're pretty clear on that. But as you said, it's always just an honor code thing. I don't know for a fact that if they're going home and lifting outside study. I will say this happens sometimes. That's a downside to research. You can only control as much as you can. I wish we could put them in like a metabolic ward and have
Yeah.
them do that, but obviously that's not ethical. But yeah, like I caught two subjects early on, like in the weight room lifting. So I had to take them out of the study. So we did start out with 50 participants. We ended with 43. And I think, and that's always expected. We always over recruit because there's always expected to be dropouts. I think those two, like I said, I caught them lifting outside the study, so they were booted. But the other ones were just personal reasons, or they couldn't miss more than 2 sessions, because if you start missing sessions, obviously that's going to affect the adaptation. Some of them, if life gets in the way, whatever, if they miss more than 2 sessions, I gotta remove them as well. But yeah, as you noted, that's just a limitation to the research in general, is that you can only control so much. But I'm relatively confident that at least the majority of them, if not all, we're pretty good with that.
Yeah, that's again something that people don't really think about with the research. Like they just think that these people are kind of machines, but it's like actual real people. And the more I've talked to people that do research, it's almost like having a bunch of clients that you have to make sure that stay consistent. And we know how that sometimes doesn't always work out. People have lives and other things going on. And you almost have to sell, as you were talking about this, I'm thinking in my head, like you almost have to sell the kind of doing it, right? Because there are some good selling points, right? I think some people would probably hear only 2 times a week, but at the end of the day, you're getting a free program, you're getting some free training out of it, right? Like you're going to be pushing them maybe probably harder than what they typically do. So there are some probably selling points here on doing something like this too.
Oh yeah, for sure. And as you noted too, the big thing that I always talk about is, and they're training, all sets are pushed like to training to failure, and you got research assistants with clipboards like encouraging you to push. So the accountability factor is high too, as we actually found out in that original study I talked about that Max Coleman led. Was like we literally looked at that. We had half the subjects, we supervised them, and the other half we gave them a program, go do it on your own. And on average, the people that we supervised grew more muscle and got a little bit stronger, right? There's also that effect of that and they were more accountable as well. We found that the people in the unsupervised group were more likely to miss sessions and have to drop out. And a lot of times, a lot of what the participants will tell me is like, I really like, they miss it actually after the study's done. A lot of them, because they're like, man, I miss, because I have to every day. It's like I text them like, hey, reminder to be in the lab at this time for your workout. So like they miss that accountability factor, and knowing that, oh man, even though if they miss the sessions and have to drop, like it doesn't affect like their grades or anything, but it's just knowing like, all right, someone's expecting me, holding me accountable, so that increases their adherence from what they tell me, keeps them consistent. Like we keep track of all their progression and all that. And it is hard training. And not only, lastly too, is you can see in the mirror or whatnot over time if you're making progress, but especially the more trained you are, it can be difficult to
Yeah.
see how much muscle you grew. So you literally using ultrasound to look at muscle thickness. So you're getting a pretty objective way as well to look at that. So they enjoy that aspect of it too.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, you're not going to be able to get that out just normally, right? That, like you said, the ultrasound there for the muscle growth. And also, I want to hit on too, like you guys got 43 people and you had 43 people finish, right? That's a pretty good amount as well too, especially resistance trained individuals. And for this type of 8-week study, that's really hard to get that many people. But I guess that's probably something that people don't understand too, is I feel like a lot of these studies, especially resistance trained individuals, you're looking at, I feel like most of them are somewhere between 5 and 20 people. And I feel like 20 people are like really happy. Kudos to you guys to be able to get 43 people. Obviously, larger sample size is always going to be helpful there. And obviously for you, that's going to be more challenging because you got to push those people and everything. But yeah, I just want to point that out too. 43 people. That's pretty good with that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say too, is obviously my name's on the leading author, but I will say I wouldn't be able to 43 subjects. You said that's a lot to take care of, and I'd be able to carry out the study without it is truly a team effort. So shout out to like everyone that is in the AMDL lab or AMD lab at Lehman. I could not have done it without any of them. So it is a massive undertaking, and a lot of time all these is mostly people in the grad program or even the undergrad that are just want to help out with the study and be a part of research. But it's all volunteer hours on our end too. So it's a lot of effort that's put into it. So I'm very grateful for all the help that we get. I think that's the special part about our lab and our ability to carry out those studies with relatively higher sample sizes compared to some of the other literature or research in the resistance training literature is just a big kudos to all the grad students and all the help that we can get in the lab. So definitely want to give a shout out to them.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Because I know people out on social media will keyboard warriors will say whatever. Like I was looking at, I think Pac had a post and someone's, oh, I wish there was like it was a longer time frame. It's come on, man. It's I
Me
think
too. Me too.
right.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, it's a problem with that. Yeah, it's tough. No, it's just I was just sorry to cut you off, but I was just gonna say, like, I saw that too. And I wanted to respond and be like, yeah, man, I wish I could have ran it longer too. But you got to think, could you imagine having to keep 43 people coming consistently for 8 weeks without missing more than 2 sessions? Life happens. Summer hits, they go on vacation. So usually that's why we run these things per semester, because they're on campus. It's easier to keep them there. So there's all those other factors involved as well. But yeah, sorry to cut you off.
no, good. Yeah, no, it's good to hear it from you. You went through this, but it was funny because Brad Schoenfeld had a response. He's like, yes, we're planning a 10-year study on the topic. Dr. Pack and Coach Wolf will be taking the lead on that. So I thought that was funny with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
people are always going to find something there with that. So cool. Well, let's dive into the results. That's obviously what people really want to know. I think we did a good job of kind of breaking down the design, the reason for everything. So yeah, let's go over the results and what you guys found.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start just with those acute results in terms of the training volume, the volume load, which was surprising to me that both it was very similar. There was no real differences or didn't seem like any meaningful differences when looking at the acute volume load between conditions. However, as expected, to no surprise, the time it took to complete a training session was much less. In the supersets group, I think on average it was like 25 minutes less. I think it came out to 36% less time or something like that compared to the traditional sets. And then also for the acute session setting, the session RPE was about a point higher for the supersets group. So I think it was like 8.1 we asked, so the scale was 1 to 10, with 10 being like max effort exertion throughout the entire session. And the average for the supersets was like 8.1. And then for the traditional sets, it was 7.1 or something like that. You could argue that there's a meaningful difference there. But then interestingly, when we also had them write down session RPE the entire 8-week study, and I expected, just because they'd be more adapted to the program and whatnot, that the RP would slowly go down, but it maintained basically the same for the 8 week study. And actually, the traditional sets group seemed to creep up. So the gap between those two merged. I think it ended up being, when you look at the average RPE across the 8 week study period, it was like 8.1 again for the supersets and then like 7.8 for the traditional sets. And I think it could be that, like I said, we were almost applying progressive overload in that every set was taken to failure and we were adjusting the load. So as they got stronger, if they were able to, whatever load they used last week, if they were able to get 13 reps to failure, then we upped the load to keep them within that 8 to 12 rep range. So maybe because the relative intensity was pretty much the same the whole time, the RP could have stayed higher. That, again, that's just speculation, but that was an interesting finding to me. And then as for I think that was it for the acute study. But as for the long term results, which is the more fun results, I would say, for hypertrophy, relatively similar growth between conditions across all muscle groups assessed. And then strength was pretty much the same as well. Same for lower body power, or for the jumping, I told you not much change there. And then endurance was also the same. So pretty much, to sum it up, in terms of the adaptations, the long-term adaptations were same across between conditions.
But in less time. So that's a big takeaway there. Same, but
Yes.
obviously in less time there with that. Because I think people would probably hear this and be like, wait, so it was the same. I thought supersets were better. But again, really the goal here was just like, hey, you can incorporate these in, and if you need to save some time, you can essentially throw these in and it's not going to hurt your muscle growth, which, like you said, at the end of the day, that's really what people are after, is what is that going to be? What's the muscle growth results there with that? So cool. I guess then just the practical application. So obviously we know we can utilize these now, and you're not going to see anything. I guess real quick, what would you say, was there any kind of limitations, anything that you would say, and maybe we've hit on this throughout, but is there anything like that you heard, like any limitations to it, anything like that kind of caught your eye, or that maybe you thought of like after you got the results and stuff like that?
Sure, yeah. And like you said, first off, just it is, in my opinion, it's a win for supersets, because like you said, that shows you can get the same amount of gains in substantially less time spent training in the gym, right? So definitely a strategy to implement, especially for those that don't want to spend hours in the gym. But yeah, limitations in practical applications, I would say there's always limitations to any research, as we touched on a couple earlier, but I'd say some would just be, if you think about the exercises we used, the protocol we used, I'd be relatively confident that you can take generalize the findings to different exercise combinations, but there's got to be some caution there, right? Because these results are specific to those exercises. And I will point out too, if you look at it, it was only twice a week, right? And you could consider it very relatively lower volume, because the only exercises they performed, don't get me wrong, full body and everything, and they did grow and all that, but it was 4 sets per exercise and just lat pull down, bench press, and then only for the lower body, just 2 single joint exercises, leg extension, leg curl, and then just the biceps curl, triceps push down. So I'd say a limitation there would be implementing higher volumes, or different exercise variations in the real world, or maybe even like we looked at just all supersets in terms of the exercises, but in the real world, sometimes, I know me personally, I won't perform every single exercise as a superset. So maybe doing my single joint movements as supersets, or even like a bench row. But then generally speaking, I'm not going to perform, most of the time, I'm not going to do like a back squat or like a RDL superset with a leg extension or a hamstring curl, or superset those taxing multi-joint exercises, if that makes sense. So I would just say probably needs to be a little caution when taking these findings. Be like, oh, cool, like same gains between supersets and straight sets, but then don't think that maybe you go out there and you start doing an RDL and barbell back squat to failure, and maybe you don't see the same gains there compared to traditional sets. So I would just say caution in how you take those findings and generalize them to other exercise combinations, especially too with the rest intervals. So for, like I said, for this superset, we did minimal rest between them, but in the real world, there's no harm in waiting a little more time between those paired sets.
Yeah, so you could also, like you said there, you could maybe rest a little bit longer in between doing the exercises. Now, obviously, that obviously takes away the kind of the time component, but 36%, that's a pretty good amount, right? So you'd have some wiggle room there if you need to. But yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the point there with this is specific, obviously, to these exercises. Obviously, like you said, if you pick different ones, this may impact things, right? Things that are maybe a little bit more fatiguing overall, like you said, back squats, RDLs. You would obviously want to be careful with that. And then I think you hit on this, but the kind of frequency and volume as well, too, right? This was 2 times a week. So that's obviously something you need to take into consideration. If you train 6-7 days a week, does that potentially alter it? Again, this is part of research. We don't know for sure, but again, something to potentially keep in mind if you're training pretty high volumes. But you guys did a pretty good job, I feel like, with the volume side of things.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, it's a great point too. Is we talked about in the manuscript, which shout out Max Coleman again. He was the one who brought this up in the practical application section when we were going into it, is that this could potentially, obviously we're seeing a lot of research coming out showing like potential like higher volumes might be best to maximize muscle growth, with some caveats, whatever. But that also comes with more time spent in the gym if you're doing it as straight sets. So potentially using agonist, antagonist, supersets could be a potential strategy to increase your volume without spending more time in the gym. But again, as we talk about in the manuscript, this theory is speculative because we don't have any like high volume superset studies to compare that to. So just having some caution when taking those findings or whatever and applying that to a more high volume, high frequency approach. And I said the best way to do that is just if you're implementing supersets for the first time yourself, just monitor your recovery, how you're feeling. Because as I mentioned earlier as well, there was greater instances of training induced nausea, the supersets compared to the traditional sets. Although I'll mention that generally speaking, those symptoms tended to subside over time. But for some, they didn't. So some they persisted. Like I said, if you don't have the best cardio or you're not used to performing supersets and you first implement them, potentially using lower volumes to start, don't go and do a bunch of exercises and supersetting them, and maybe even waiting 30 seconds to a minute between those paired sets. And then over time, merging that gap or experimenting with higher volumes. So it's gonna change depending on the person and their experience level and their cardio. But yeah, so I would say supersets may be more demanding. So just being aware of those factors when going in and implementing them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. I guess then what would be any like downside? I guess would be pros and cons of using this. Maybe who is it more likely for and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say that I don't think there's many downsides, if any at all. But the one downside I would say, pragmatically speaking, would be if you go to a busy commercial gym, you're a little bit more limited maybe on the exercise variations you can superset. Like for example, for me, when I this past was able to work out like at Lehman in the lab and whatnot, and use some of the equipment in the weight room there, which was generally empty when I would get there earlier. So I had the luxury of being able to superset whatever I wanted without worrying too much about taking up a lot of equipment and being that guy at the gym. So I would say if you don't have that option, I would say Dr. Milo Wolf has a couple of great videos as well on supersets and how to practically apply them in the gym, commercial gym setting on YouTube. But yeah, just being aware of that. And then potentially, like for me personally, if I'm in a busy gym, I'll take advantage of supersets when I can, but as a time saving strategy, I'll also implement drop sets or myo sets if needed, if I'm in a time crunch. But I would say these results mostly apply to those that, training time or lack of time is considered like a number one barrier for a lot of people when it comes to exercise adherence. So for people with time related issues, these findings can be very applicable to them. Also, I mentioned earlier, those that want to, even natural bodybuilders, or people that are looking to maximize their muscle growth, but also have other jobs or other factors preventing them from wanting to, and also who not many people want to spend hours in the gym anyways. So using that approach or strategy as well to increase your weekly set volume without needing to substantially increase the amount of time you spend training.
Yeah. And I think there's two that I see like where it could be super useful based on, again, obviously everything you said, but this is something that, I mean, people probably have trained this way for a while, but like in-person training, right? Like being an in-person trainer, this is the perfect time, I feel like, to utilize this because you really are trying to maximize that time. And that just goes back to maximizing time. But I think I remember, dude, when I was a trainer, it was like, this this was a while back, but I was into the main lifts. So I'd have clients take 2-minute rests in between. And it's, man, I could have been way more effective back then, especially knowing this. Still did some supersets, but could definitely have utilized that a lot more. I guess the other kind of person too that I think this could really benefit, and maybe you hit on this earlier, I don't know for sure, maybe somebody that like it keeps them mentally engaged throughout the workout as well too. It's yeah, on paper and the research is, hey, take longer rest times and stuff for muscle growth. But for some people, if that causes them to maybe get sidetracked, not stay as mentally engaged, they may not get the best training session in. And whereas we can maybe condense this and keep them mentally engaged as well too throughout.
Totally agree. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why personally I always enjoyed supersets more. I just felt like I was getting more, even though I was doing the same amount of working sets I would doing straight sets. I just felt like I was passing the time more productively, if that makes sense, and is being more efficient. But I love the point too you made about the personal training aspect, because like the gym I work at, fortunately it's a private gym, so I don't have to worry about it being in a busy commercial gym. So basically the majority of the exercises we implement we generally try to pair them up as supersets. And one other thing I'll mention too is, like I said, this study is agonist antagonist supersets, but I personally I like supersetting exercises. Like I think I called them earlier non-overlapping supersets. I think someone mentioned that. Someone coined that phrase. It might have been Mike Isertel, in doing something like a lateral raise and then maybe a calf raise or something. So two exercises for completely different muscle groups. I would be fairly confident that you probably could expect similar results to straight sets. Again, that's just me being speculating. But I will say, again, being careful, not like when I perform like a heavy or a multi-joint lower body exercise, like a squat, that's pretty taxing for me when I get close to failure. So I don't usually like pairing those exercises up as supersets. So it's going to depend on the person and how you feel. If I know Dr. Eric Helms, I've seen him, he's big on supersets, I believe. And I've seen him actually superset like a leg press in an RDL, or not an RDL, like a leg curl. And
Okay.
he says it doesn't interfere. So he's like, it doesn't interfere. So he doesn't feel it compromises performance, or it doesn't feel any interference. So that could be something to try, depending on how you feel and your experience level. But yeah, for me, I would just say being aware of that as well. And I'm sure you might feel the same way. It's like there's some exercises that are very psychologically and physically demanding that kind of require those 2 minutes. Actually, I'm not on my phone. I'm just getting ready for that next set, preparing. So I would say there's that to consider as well.
Yeah. So again, yeah, individual like preference and how each kind of exercise makes you feel is obviously something you want to look into there with that. Cool, man. Where do you see, is there any research coming out on this topic moving forward? Is there anything you would like to see or anything like that?
Yeah, so I would love to see different superset variations being studied, and especially the order. So, like I said, we did lat pull down, then the bench press, and then same for like leg curl, then the leg extension. And there's some of those acute studies actually looked at the performance and found like potentially different amount of repetitions you can perform depending on the order of the superset. So, interestingly enough, like they did, I think there was a study that compared a bench press to a row superset, and then compare that to a row to a bench press, like that order. And they found that performing like the bench press first and then doing a set for the row led to more repetitions performed to failure in the row compared to if you did it traditionally. But the inverse order had no additional effect on either exercise. So there's also potentially something physiologically going on that could enhance performance in the agonist muscle when you pre-fatigue the antagonist, that we needs more exploration or more research in that field. Same with some research show that if you do a set of leg curls and then go to a set of leg extensions within a minute after, you see almost like a performance enhancing effect for the leg extension, being able to perform more repetitions. And it's not totally clear as to why that is. So that's why I was saying I was surprised. I expected to see more volume specifically in the lower body superset. But again, those studies were just those two exercises. It wasn't in the realm of a full body superset protocol. So residual fatigue possible that could have been at play there. So I would say different exercise orders, different exercise combinations, and also really be interested to see, maybe I don't want to speak too soon, but potentially could be a study out of the AMD lab within the future on like pre-exhaust training as well. So doing something like a leg extension paired with a leg press. So looking at those like two same muscle group supersets. So I think just exploring the different variations of supersets, and also, as we talked about, looking at the relationship between set volume with supersets. So maybe someone could throw together like a within subject study where they do like a leg curl paired with a leg extension, and one limb is doing higher volumes and with the supersets, and the other limb is doing traditional sets. And we can see if those higher volumes or higher frequencies impact the adaptation. So a lot to explore there, to say the least. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, clearly you've thought about that in terms of where you might want to see that
Yeah.
go with that. Yeah, hopefully that stuff comes out. And yeah, again, I think this was a great study to show that it works. And now, like you said, now once you answer one question, then a million others open up, right? And that's just how it goes. Awesome, man. One last question on this. Is there anything that after paper came out, you learned everything? Is there anything that you would do differently, like in terms of the design, setup, anything like that? Or maybe not, maybe you felt like you did it the best as you could there with that. So
Great question. And I would love to like you said, maybe do higher volumes or whatever. But I think for the constraints that we have in our lab with the resources we have, I think this approach was probably the best way to carry out the study. So I don't have anything that's, oh man, I really wish I did this or did that. Potentially the only thing would be like maybe more of a formal questionnaire about like nausea during the study or like how they felt, or maybe even some type of, you know how I said the RPE scale, but maybe like an enjoyment scale. Like we talked about enjoyment. So like
yeah.
rating, if they had them rate how much they actually enjoyed the training session itself. So maybe small stuff like that. But that's the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, with all the constraints, you did a great job. But and like you said, people are always going to nitpick. But at the end of the day, you did what you could. And yeah, man, I think it was really well done. And appreciate your hard work and getting that out there. And again, giving people more things to work with, and again, more tools in the toolbox there. So cool, man. Before I let you go, again, we talked about what you're doing in the future. But is there anything coming out on your end soon, or anything that you're like looking forward to or excited about in the next little bit?
Yeah. So right now in our lab, I'm not really actively there much at all, but they're carrying out for the first time where they're doing a long-term study in the summer, and it's being the data collection process being led by my friend Alec Pinheiro. Shout out him, but it's the study designed by Dr. Mila Wolf and Dr. Pack on length and partials. So right now they're carrying out a study comparing length and partials to full ROM in the upper body with upper body exercises and looking at muscle growth in the biceps and triceps. So and it's in resistance trained individuals too.
Cool.
So really excited for those results to come out. I think they're like halfway through data collection right now. I was just up there last week, so I got to keep in and see how they're doing and all that. But so yeah, they're trekking along there. So I'm really pumped for that. I'm also pumped for, I know I mentioned earlier, to see Alex's thesis is also being carried out right now, looking at the post activation performance enhancement in doing like a heavy back squat and then looking at jumping performance. So I would say those two are the ones currently going on that I'm excited for, but always a ton of research being pumped out of that lab. So I'm sure there's a bunch that I'm not even coming to mind right now that will be coming out shortly.
Yeah, no, that's cool on the length and partials, because I know that's been like the biggest like critique of length and partials so far has been the not being done on resistance trained individuals. Yeah, that'll be super cool to see that. Cool, man. Again, really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or anything like that, where they can find out more about you and find out more about what you do and things like that?
Yeah, my Instagram, I guess that's where I repost things from our lab, all that. Ryan Burke, BURKE 30. And then for any of you that are really interested in the research side of things or a little nerdy like I am, ResearchGate, I'm on there as well. You just search my name. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. It was a blast getting to talk to you and talk about the Superset study.
Yep, absolutely. Again, great job. Looking forward to seeing your work that you have come out in the future and as you go into Rutgers and everything like that. So we'll definitely keep in touch, man, and we'll have you back on again in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks, man.